Okay, we can start, I think. Hello, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to a panel talk, which is a part of the Riga Photo Month. And my name is Carolina Gambara, and I have a great pleasure tonight to speak to wonderful people, great artists, and there are only three of us, and you might be wondering where is the third person, but I will get to that in a second. So please welcome Nina Berman, who is an American photographer, a filmmaker also, an author and an educator. Her work looks at American politics, militarism, trauma, and resistance. She exhibited widely in several places, including the Zatari refugee camp and also the Whitney Museum of American Art, just to mention those two. She's the author of The Purple Hearts, Back from Iraq. It's a book with portraits and interviews with American veterans. She also made Homeland, which is an examination of militarization of American life. And recently an autobiography of Miss Wish, a book which has been shortlisted by the Aperture and our book prizes. She has received many fellowships and awards. And just to mention the few: New York Foundation for the Arts, WordPress Photo Foundation, Pictures of the Year. She's a member of photography and film collective New Images, and currently a professor at Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. And she lives in New York. Welcome, Nina.
Thank you so much.
And my second guest is Tanvi Mishra from Delhi. She's a photo editor, curator, and a writer. And she currently works at the as a creative director at the Caravan magazine. It's a journal for about politics and culture in Delhi. She's also part of the photo editorial team of PIX, which is a South Asian publication. Previously, she was part of the Delhi Photo Festival team and also Photo Kathmandu, a festival in Nepal. She writes and occasionally her work is printed and published in places like Foam magazine. She has served on various juries, including WordPress Photo, Hindu Photojournalism Award, and the Catchlight Grant. She's been also a nominator on the jury panel for WordPress Photo Hub Sword Masterclass. Like I said, our third guest was supposed to be here today from Gaza, Mohammed Zanon. Unfortunately, we cannot connect with him. And I think there could be an internet or electricity problem at the moment, which I think only shows how difficult it is to have a person from a conflict-torn place with us to speak and to share his experience. I'm still hoping he will be able to join us, but if not, we will try to do our best to try and cover the topic today, the topic which I try to describe as a role of a photographer in the age of catastrophe. And by the catastrophe, I don't only meant some abrupt, events that happen, but also long-term processes, that we have been watching and looking at and analyzing, and that has appeared in our work. As a member of Archive of Public Protest, we are in Poland, we are like a loose collective of photographers, activists, and artists, and we cover the ongoing protests in Poland. We have recently talked a lot about subjectivity, engagement, being an activist and being a photojournalist, but also being an engaged, photo editor or a writer or a researcher. And so obviously in the text that describes this event, there's like a hidden thesis that in this time of catastrophe, which could be COVID, war, conflict, the rise of far right, social problems, water shortages, climate change, and so on, that we are trying to be engaged. But I would maybe start with a small step back and try to answer this maybe a banal question. Why do we expect photographers and photography in general to speak about the contemporary issues, to respond to the ongoing problems, conflicts, social, political things? And why don't we hold such panels, let's say, within a context of other arts?
Nina, do you want to start?
Well, I might disagree with you in the sense I'm not sure that we expect this from photography as a medium. I think there's, all sorts of photography. I think we do certainly expect it from journalists who use photography. And just the practice of documenting, of witnessing, of being present carries a certain authenticity. Of course, we can dispute whether the picture is true or not true, but just the act of showing up and of being there is something in a society where lots of people are kind of checked out, right? And so I think that there is some value that's embedded just in the act of being there, of being present, which photographers have to do, right? That's what we do. So I think there's that, but I'd love to hear what you might want to say.
Tanvi?
Yeah, I kind of see myself as a citizen of society first, and a photographer, image maker, writer, etc. second, and photographers are part of a larger, here journalists, or I would say people who engage with the visual medium but are political thinkers. They have political minds who are engaged with society and who are bothered by things that are going on. Just like what Nina said, there's a certain section of society that is checked out, and I think what affords people to check out is privilege. So it's actually the people who are most affected by something are forced to be political because they have to respond because it's affecting them directly. And then photographers kind of have this choice to kind of throw themselves into this world that might not be their own reality. So I think as citizens of the world and citizens of society, like there's a responsibility to act. And I was actually recently, I always keep going back to Ariela Azule. It's just, it's a text that always it's a kind of a reckoning text. And, how she kind of places herself separately from other postmodern thinkers like Sontag and Barthes, where there's this whole thing of compassion fatigue and image fatigue. And she's like, no, there's an accountability that you have. And when you're confronted with a photograph, you have a responsibility to act rather than saying, I'm too tired of looking. And of course, like we can debate what is image fatigue and what excessive violent images, etc., can do. But, to constantly keep telling yourself that one is, as a viewer, I have a responsibility. And if the viewer has a responsibility, then the person who builds the view for them has a responsibility. So I think in society we have to be active citizens, especially in the very messed up societies that we inhabit today.
But I think the conflict comes from encountering a photograph and wanting to act and not knowing what to do. And photographers have not been very good at providing viewers with a roadmap on what to do. And just kind of saying, oh, okay, I'll share the picture. And maybe that's the most basic act that you can do. Or I'll send money to some group, right? And maybe that's the second most basic. But in my career and in discussions with colleagues, there's a tremendous sense of frustration and feeling of powerlessness, where the work you do doesn't seem to have as much an effect as you want. And this kind of gap in process and effect and in political change can lead, not just for photographers, but for activists, right? To burnout and a sense of, why am I doing this? Why am I putting myself on the line? Is anybody listening? And I've tried to find a narrative to tell myself about, maybe I'm not thinking of change in a way that makes sense, right? Or maybe political change is not something that can be plotted and predicted, right? That that change happens and awareness happens in all sorts of ways, none of which are necessarily better or worse than others. And I think if we start to maybe look at and value small ways that people change, right? Or wake up or stop checking out, then it can be much more motivating, because there is an exhaustion level, right?
Yeah.
I mean, no matter what catastrophe you are under at the current time.
Yes, if you look at the change as let's say a neutral word, because we tend to think that the change would be always for the better, and we love to speak about changing the world, changing societies, changing countries, and so on. And this is a big scale expectation, and the frustration is enormous, when we have such expectations. And I very often think that, maybe a little change, here would just be that spark, maybe it's worth doing something for one person. I remember, like when in 2015, the image of Alan Kurdi, the Syrian boy, who died, who drowned in the sea, was found, and that image was everywhere. And there were these very powerful headlines which said, if this image is not making us stop the refugee crisis or help the refugees, then nothing will, a huge, let's say, expectation and the pressure embedded in that image and the fact that it was circulated. And as we know, it did not help in any way. And actually there were several other pictures of several other children in the same situation. There was one, from America, from the so-called caravan, right? I don't know if you remember, Nina, the child that went with the father in the river. There was a picture of Rohingya child, in the very same kind of frame, but again, that didn't hit the headline. So, but on the other hand, there was a research on the impact of Alan Kurdi's image, and that research showed that there has been some action. There have been donations, and Cameron and the British administration loosened up a little bit, the law, the regulation at that time, so some people could actually enter Great Britain. And then I was thinking, maybe one person who actually got into that, and that was a life-changing thing for him or her, that was maybe the change, but it's a long way, and it's almost impossible to predict the direct, impact of the images. Can you think of like some examples, like when you saw, a difference that something was making?
Well, for instance, I think right now it's really fascinating to see the images coming out of the United States of pro-Palestine protests. So there have been protests by Palestinians across the United States for years, right? But now you're seeing them in places you don't normally see pro-Palestine protests. For instance, the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, thousands and thousands of people in New York City, which has more been known for pro-Zionist protests. And so seeing, I think it's making actually quite a difference in people's perceptions of where the American public stands. And is it a monolithic response to Israeli violence? And in fact, seeing picture after picture made, some by professional photographers, others by people themselves, residents, is changing the idea of what it means to support Palestinian rights, right? So I see just in the past couple weeks, conversations changing and photographers helping to drive those conversations, normalizing the image of a Palestinian standing up and insisting on human rights and a right to their homeland. This is something relatively new in the United States, and something that photographers maybe in the past did not cover as much as they should. And, you know, coverage of events has ramifications. They can lead to bigger events. Protesters look and say, oh, look at what's happening in Detroit. Wow. Or look what's happening, you know, in Ramallah. And people all across the world are motivated by this, right? This is one of the amazing things about social media. So just in terms of, does that mean that the Israelis are going to stop bombing Gaza? No. But does that mean that maybe the American political equation has a chance for change? Perhaps, right? So I see this as, you know, a kind of maybe a beginning of something that will become more normalized and more accepted then as, oh, Palestinians have a right for their homeland. This is not simply a narrative that's going to be told by Jewish Zionists.
Tanvi?
That's the idea of sort of redefining that what change really means, because I think something that Nina, you said about, you know, we always talk about visibility in photography, and it's like, what does visibility really do? There were just two things that really came to my mind. One, I was, you know, when I was judging the World Press Awards in 2020, we were looking at, this was Jan 2020, so we were looking at 2019, which seems like a distant reality now. But 2019 was seen as, at that time, the year of protest. It's like there were protests across the world, and you know, there were Yellow Vests, there was Hong Kong, there was Chile, and India witnessed. And I was from India, and it was interesting, and that's the whole other debate of representation, etc., in photography, that I witnessed the largest public protest I have seen or heard of in my country in decades. And I did not see it amidst those, you know, so many photographs that I saw there, but I knew that something was happening in the world, that protests were taking place elsewhere, and you could see markers in those protests reflected across, you know. And so what is carrying that message? It is the photograph, because those are things you can write about, and of course reports exist and there's academic research, but the real sort of, you know, it's the image that's the carrier of the message. And so there was so much conversation. So India had anti-CAA protests. It's an anti-Muslim law that was the government is trying to push in. And it's a Hindu majoritarian government that's in power. So it was for the first time that one was not only seeing thousands and thousands of people on the streets, but Muslim women were actually helming these protests. So one was that you're seeing so many people, but seeing Muslim women, and for Muslim women to see other Muslim women, it's like, you know, that galvanizes a certain kind of energy. And there was a protest site in Delhi, which went on for close to 3 months, and COVID actually came. We all say that COVID came at the right time to break up the whole momentum. And it killed the longest running protest as part of the CAA. And that protest was helmed only by women. So it was Shaheen Bagh, and it was sort of the center of the whole thing. And so it started in Delhi, and then what the whole conversation was that mini Shaheen Bagh started propping up everywhere in Calcutta, in Bombay, in Lucknow, and so many other places. And they were looking at each other. So the same kind of tent was propped up, and you know, the event would be similar. So I think that is the kind of change. like revolutions are also to think of it in terms of endurance, change, revolution, like these are long-term plans. And if one sees it in that sense, then these shifts are really important, because it's because of the images that I saw in that year that I believe that this is possible, to get these people out of the street. So yeah, that's where I think that I don't know, people really dismiss the visibility argument, but that it's become staid, and people are tired of looking. But I still think that there's immense amount of power, especially at times when governments are trying to suppress this very news. So you have to kind of push back. It's a political act to document at this point of time. So.
Yeah, this morning I had a short conversation with Rafa Mila from the archive, and we're talking about the visibility. And I think what you said just now really makes me think that we kind of all agree that the visibility is important, and it carries the message. There's a certain mutual maybe understanding between those who make these images and those who come to the protests and show certain signs and demands. And there's this like contract, almost like in Azule's, the civil contract between the people who become the subjects of these images and those who make these images. But in the same time, in places like Poland, this discussion somehow is also on some other levels right now. We're thinking of the protest as an art, we're looking at it as a performance, and we are trying also within the archive, like perform with the images, make newspapers and so on. And so we are like trying to theorize and create some critical discourse. So we're very much actually focusing on the visibility. And then we thought like, okay, but what about those, who whose arms been broken on these protests, who've been like sprayed right on the face, with the anti-abortion ban, that protest became somehow very quickly anti-governmental, and women from the women's strike said like, no, remember, we are fighting for a free legal abortion. Obviously there are all these other things. So I'm thinking, there's a lot of like invisible force and invisible work within the protest, or like in all these movements, something that cannot be photographed. And photography is somehow some very often very glamorous. It's becoming part of something that people embrace and celebrate, but there's so much that we cannot photograph that is like behind those movements, which makes me want to ask you about
Can I say one thing? Can I say one thing about that?
Yeah.
Because so at least in the US, I've noticed really for the past 10 years, and I'm not really quite sure what to make of this, but yeah, a protest will happen ostensibly around an issue or an outrage. But pretty quickly, the issue becomes secondary, and it becomes a fight for who gets to stand in the street, right? And so, and it becomes a battle with the police over space. Who can occupy this particular space? And at times, I mean, it becomes, a kind of cat and mouse game, a violent one, a risky one, but a cat and mouse game between protesters who are asserting their right to assemble and police who want control, right? They want control and they want to stop it. Lost often in the midst of this is the whole reason for the outrage in the first place. And I saw this during the Occupy movement. I've seen this at some of the George Floyd protests, and maybe it relates to what you just mentioned in Poland and Warsaw, that there are these protests, right? Maybe the government framed it one way, but for the women participating, hey, this is about the rights to my body. And yeah, within that is the right to whether I can stand on the street or not, right, and speak my mind. But I'm just wondering how to keep, how to keep the issues kind of at the forefront, and should they be, or should this just be about I'm insisting that I'm going to occupy this street corner at this moment, and that's going to be the fight to the finish. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think within like the COVID situation, that became a very basic, problem, because we were not allowed to go to the street. So yeah, you were like kind of tempted to be there, like at whatever cost, and to think about the demands and to think about the program and the strategy and everything when you cannot go out from your house, not to mention occupy a central, spot in the city. It's like a lot to think about, to plan, to execute. And I think this became a challenge. In Warsaw, we had these like you said, cat and mouse games, where the police would like go into the crowd and try to disperse people and like put them in tiny groups, and they would like run, and there will be a cut, and the blockade and this and that. So like a total chaos, so it was not even like we couldn't even think of occupying some place because it was just physically impossible.
Yeah, so many of those things are so intertwined, right? The right to access of public space, and I think different. That's where I think the difference in countries also really comes in. Like, how much of the law can you actually activate? I think in a place like the US, while the law and every institution is in any place biased against minorities, but there are some systems that work better than others. So here in India, if you go to court and there are still people who seek legal remedies for injustice done to them, but they're going to be fighting these battles for like 10 years or something. So and so it's in that kind of ecosystem that the police can actually really abuse their power. To think of somebody like a Derek Chauvin getting convicted here. I mean, even in the US, it was a distant reality, which has now come into reality because civil society pushed for this to happen. For us, it really feels like this is just a far reality. So then I think we have to think of other strategies, because sometimes the force is benign, where it's like similar to Carolina, what you said, that the police will try to disperse you. Like during the CAA protests, they kept putting protesters in buses and getting the bus to go out of the city and just dropping them there and just dispersing them. But in other cases, it's much more violent. They throw tear gas, and there are injuries. And protesters have to constantly, I think, like strategize on how to come back. And that's where I think photographers have to kind of keep pace with this strategy, because something like the farmers protest, which actually collected it was deemed to be the largest public protest in history, the number of people that collected on 28th November last year, that was in the middle of the pandemic. So that protest has been going on since 27th November 2020. They're still out on the streets, but because India news has shifted, right? So as soon as news shifts, photographs just disappear. And once photographs disappear, it's like those guys have been sitting there for more than 6 months. But what shows you? What proves to you that they're still there? So I think that's where I think they're asserting their right to occupy public space, which is entwined with the farm laws that they're looking to repeal. And the government at this point is saying, oh, you're going to be carriers of COVID, etc. And it's like, no, you actually, if you listen to our demands, if you indulge in negotiation, then we wouldn't be here in the first place. So it's important to keep bringing attention back with your reporting, with your journalism, to what the actual issue is, and not kind of be carried away. And to also to keep reminding, I think photographers have to maybe be those actors, like reactivators of public memory, because COVID can really act as a smokescreen to so many injustices. And so we keep kind of popping images in the middle of this catastrophe that is going on, this urgent catastrophe of things like gender, of caste, of race, that are just all pervasive and ubiquitous. So yeah, so kind of, I guess, reactivating it into people's timelines.
yes, you know, we're also in this case of the farmers' protest. This is a good example of something that is ongoing, and also the audience might not know, not be aware, but also might be bored. And there are several, you know, issues in the world, conflict, and also, you know, things that are not possible to be shown in one image or even a short series of, you know, images. And that makes me think of your books, Nina. You know, you've spent so much time on working on something that where the visibility of the problem has to be built, right? If we talk about the militarization, we do have certain images in our heads, but definitely we don't see those children that you photograph with guns. It's something that you kind of went and looked for and waited for. These are these long-term, you know, projects, undertakings where it's often hard to know what's gonna appear in front of your camera. And I would like to also ask Tanvi about, you know, how photographers that you assign or work with approach these things that nobody wants to hear about anymore, or maybe doesn't even know that there's this problem somewhere far away, you know, and it concerns a tiny group of people, you know. How do you build visuals around these difficult and like stretched, you know, topics?
Well, you know, I think that with a bunch of my work, it's because I started because one, I just wasn't seeing it anywhere else. So I'm a firm believer that if other people are doing work on a certain subject, unless I have something original to contribute, I need to move someplace else. I need to look at something else, and something that for whatever reason, I feel I can make a unique contribution. And so that's also, even though I've photographed lots of protests during COVID and George Floyd, and I've looked at police violence, it's not, that would not be a subject I would do right now, because there are so many other Black and brown photographers working in the United States now who can bring a deeper perspective, right? And so I try and hold on to, you know, the belief that even if maybe it's not the most sexiest story at the moment, or the one that people are always talking about, that maybe I have a certain, you know, sideways insight into a more endemic aspect of American society and culture that other people aren't really talking about. And if you can find whatever reason, because the photography is interesting, because you have colleagues that support you to find your way to continue, then you can really offer a contribution. And I feel that after September 11th, a lot of my peers were sucked up in the American nationalism and myth making that happened after September 11th. For whatever reason, I was not. And I took a very critical look at it. And so, you know, that was my particular skill at the moment. Whether you can always do that in your career, maybe, maybe not, right? But I think it's something to aim for, and to find people around you that you can have these conversations with, because it may not be the most obvious story, but it doesn't mean that it's not the story that you know isn't worth pursuing, right? And building on. So, you know, American militarism is very much connected to Christian nationalism. People are making these connections now. Did they really see them after September 11th? It just kind of glossed over, but that's what was going on. There was the language of the Crusades, right? That was used. So, you know, I think it's just photographers who are, I think by their nature, can tend to be reactive, or, you know, want to have that immediate, you know, photograph, that immediate experience, to step back and say, what am I good at? What am I seeing? What am I thinking that other people aren't thinking? And to try and aim for that, right? I don't know if this answers. your question or not?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to see how you spoke of September 11th and the myth making, and sort of to talk of that now, looking at where America is. I mean, we hear about it from the outside, and you sort of see this shift that's taking place, and for the first time, one is actually seeing like Americans looking at themselves critically on a larger scale. So yeah, I mean, that's, it's also kind of, I wonder that the within photography, how what you spoke of, Nina, that there's this desire to go and just document because there's something happening in front of you. For me, what's really interesting and because we're a magazine that deals with the long form, and we deal with long form in text, and like really long form, like our cover stories can be like 30,000 words, and we sometimes afford reporters 2 years to work on a story, if not more. Within 2 years to 6 months or something, where you're tracking a story, you're connecting it to a historical reference, and then you're bringing it to the present moment. And that's kind of what I also look for in photographers' works. It's like to go deeper, either by way of time or by sort of like building these connections. I'm really interested in hearing about the story of America today, in terms of the protests that took place last year, with reference to what you just spoke about, because that's the story, not necessarily the immediate documentation. So I look for people who have won that long-term engagement. Of course, the second thing that we've really been focusing on is, and this can kind of lead us into that very familiar territory of the insider-outsider debate. But there is some value in looking at people who come from a lived experience. Great value in that. In America, race is such a pertinent issue. In India, it's caste, and it's a societal system where people are segregated, and there is a caste, the Dalits, which are the most oppressed majority. They're deemed outside of the system, and they're called untouchables. And the thing is, caste is still very much at play. And so for me, to have a photographer who has had a lived experience also offers the possibility to reimagine what oppression looks like. So oppression doesn't always have to be a difficult image or graphic, or it's difficult in terms of when you read it, but it doesn't have to be death. It doesn't have to be violent in its obvious ways. And I think that's because life is so complex and society is complex, and it's that complexity that you're kind of looking at within photography. But again, this is not to say that I think that a person's identity is the only authentic sort of marker of authorship. I think there are people who have had long-term engagements with topics that are not their own, because really, what is your own? I mean, at the moment you go outside telling your own story, you're telling a story of the other. So yeah, there is great value also in a narrative that is not the insider. But of late, I think we've been also really searching for people who come from a lived experience, who can tell that particular story, and to use my place to be able to open up a space for them to speak.
I just want to remind everybody who's listening and watching right now that you can ask questions in the comment section on Facebook, and we will try to answer some of them. But I would like to continue here with you, Tanvi, because would you say there is a young generation of photographers in India, that is particularly interested in a certain type of, issues to cover? Is there something that you notice talking to them and looking at their work? Is there any shift that you've noticed and you could tell us about here?
I mean, I don't like separating people by young and old. So, for me, it's really, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. You're looking for authentic narratives. And I think for me, or at the Caravan, for any of us, we're not necessarily looking for someone who is necessarily vetted by known institutions of journalism. So it's not that, you have to have published in a famous newspaper, et cetera, like those markers don't necessarily apply. And I think you have to sort of put yourself more on the line, because there is a certain kind of rigor in working with people who are probably newer to because there are photographers who work outside of journalism. There is a certain kind of shift that they also have to make when they publish within a journalistic space. For us, it's different when a photographer is publishing with a story that a writer has written versus when a photographer is the author of the story. That's a different space. And I think we've been trying to expand the contours of what can actually go within a journalistic magazine. I can give an example. Someone like Laya Abril, this was like 4 years ago. Just looking at her work, I find it to be, that direction of photography is fascinating, because do you call it photography? Like, many people said that's not photography, and it's like, I don't care what it's really called. If call it photo research or whatever. Laya has reconstructions, and she has captions which are absolute fact, and she has reconstructions of fact. Now, when you place that within the pages of a journalistic magazine, what does that do? My fact checker comes back to me with like 90 questions of like, telling us to like verify the source. And it's a very interesting debate that then goes on. So what really happens, because what are the readers expecting? Of course, when you put her work inside a museum, it's a very different reception. But I think those kind of conversations are what I'm interested in. So yeah, I think it's not so much young and old. It's really who's bringing ideas that are novel and responding to the present moment. Who political beings, political thinkers, so people who are responding to society.
Unmuted. I was wondering, because in the context of Caravan, we're talking about like both long-term, short-term projects and so on. Nina, you've been also like covering, events on the street, but there are the books, that you've worked on for several years. And I was wondering, if you see, if you could tell us maybe a little bit more about the reception of the work that is like in the form of a book, of something that does not come through, the general media or press, that it requires a different time for consumption, for analysis. And if you could maybe share like the kind of like resonance that is there from the audience that you get, or feedback.
Yeah, so for a photographer making a book, it's quite a long haul, right? I mean, the financial model is a disaster, and so my first 2 books, I was lucky enough to publish with Trolley when there was this amazing publisher at the time, Gigi Giannuzzi. I don't know if either of you ever encountered him, but he was really a major supporter of photographers. And so I was able to do my first 2 books, but the most important part of those books was not so much in the making of them, but in the promotion of them afterwards. And I think this was something that was never taught to me, that I didn't have a lot of models for. And I regret that. And now with my students, I try and show them examples that, photography doesn't end when you take the picture. In some ways, it's just the beginning. And so if you want to be engaged in the political discourse, you can't, at least in my opinion, you can't just publish the book and then be done with it. You have to actively put it out there. And what spaces do you put it out in? And that can be a very political decision. If you're just going to stay in the photo community, okay, that's fine. We'll talk about the images and the sequences and maybe the type of paper that it was published on. But if you want to really be, in the political dialogue, then you have to go out in the communities that are going to get something from your book. So for me, you know, my first book, Purple Hearts, this came out, you know, a year after the start of the Iraq War, when most Americans, well, there was very few images shown of dead or wounded people, Iraqis or Americans. So, you know, how do you speak to an audience without, you know, and maintaining a certain neutrality, right? It was a slippery slope because I wanted to speak with military audiences, and I wanted to speak with audiences of wounded veterans, and I wanted to speak to kids who are being recruited to join the military. And so, you know, I learned a lot from what became, you know, a multi-year really speaking tour, an exhibition tour. And for me, and I think it was one of the most rewarding times being a photographer, is what I did after the pictures, right? And so I really encourage photographers to, many of us are shy in public speaking and all of that, but to practice, to get better, to go out there and take their pictures beyond their phone or, you know, an art space, and actually bring them into a community setting.
Nina, I was interested in something that you said where, you know, this whole debate about, there's been a debate, right, of like how many pictures of death do you show? And of course, with the Iraq war, etc. There is a critique towards American media in particular, that they're more comfortable with showing pictures of dead people outside of America than pictures of Americans. But then, you know, there's also been this other question that we've been grappling with, and there's a whole debate going on here right now in India, like say with COVID, right? And there was a piece published in the New York Times last year, like, where are the pictures of people dying? Because when one completely sanitizes the media system of death, and within the militarization sort of discourse, if you take that out, what does it do? And how did you kind of circumvent that?
Well, I know the article you're talking about, and I have great respect for the writer, but I think she was really wrong in that story, is that, and I think it's almost like an Azule argument, is that there were tons of pictures. Maybe she was just not looking in the right place. And there were so many pictures of bagged bodies of, you know, okay, you might not have had corpses, right? But is that really what you needed to see in the pandemic? I mean, there were crematoriums smoking up in Brooklyn. There was refrigerator trucks. There were people weeping. There were photographers staking out entrances to emergency rooms so they could be there for the actual moment when the dead person comes out of the ambulance and is brought into the hospital. So I don't know, I thought that photojournalists did such an amazing job during the pandemic. And
was it published though? That's the thing. I feel that images are made and they're circulated within social media. But does the national media, does the mainstream media carry these images? Because
tons of them. There were tons of them. I firmly believe if it wasn't for photojournalists, I mean, yeah, in the United States, you had a debate whether the pandemic was real because Donald Trump was a president, right? But if it wasn't for the images by photojournalists and the fact that New York City, the media capital of America, was hit so hard with, you know, some days 800 people dying a day. And so, I mean, so many of my colleagues and myself included were out on the street constantly from like the day one. And multiple publications, multiple TV broadcasts. So I'm not sure, you know, I think that sometimes people want the one iconic image. And I question that desire, right? Why do you want the one simple image that's going to tell the whole story? I mean, to me, yeah, I mean, that's not how that's not how learning happens, right? Anyway, so but I do hear you that there is this, going back to, pictures of COVID and death and pictures of people killed in war is, yeah, I mean, Americans don't want to see their soldiers, pictures of dead soldiers, because it speaks to them of defeat. And so they censor them. And they want to show a few here and there to create the heroes, but to show any mass sense of defeat, right, or weakness, no, I don't think any country actually does that.
Tanvi, we saw images of dead, burning bodies in crematoriums from India. There were several of them. And I wonder if there was a discussion on this type of coverage, and if this type of coverage actually reflects, the size of the tragedy or the purpose of showing that. What was the narrative over there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a piece that I wrote that's coming out tomorrow, so I can send it to you guys. But there was actually that. Here, we could identify that one image, and that one image was actually, I don't know if it's really defining, but it was really the catalyst, because it was an image that was also a drone photograph. It was like so impersonal, taken from the top. You see these lights glimmering, and then you see that there are like 30, 40 burning spots, and these are crematoriums. And on the left side of the image, you see this like tightly packed colony. So it's also that the living are right beside the dead, and it was just speaking to an Indian reality that was taking place at the end of April. And then once that image sort of circulated on social media, it was by a Reuters photographer, Danish Siddiqui. He started getting completely lambasted on Twitter. Of course, that image got picked up, and then media published it. And then this was 22nd, and like in 3 or 4 days, New York Times carried a front page, and Time magazine did a cover. And the big debate basically was that the Indian right wing weaponized the language of ethics to basically go into the privacy debate, saying that, you are not respecting the dignity of the dead by showing this. And this is actually a very interesting phenomenon where you're actually using language of mental health, privacy, dignity, which have very much been within photo or ethics ecosystems, that's being used to say don't document. And so there was a huge pushback by Indian mainstream media is very suspect. They're very controlled by the government at this point. But photographers really pushed back. And you could see that as soon as Danish's image circulated, there was a whole host of photographers that went and started documenting crematoriums. That after a week, I was like, okay, the story has to move. Now we've seen so much of this that this has to move. But that propelled, I think, the world to take note. And by the end of April, India was receiving aid from like so many different countries. And while the government was really trying to say that, oh, these are not true, or this is fake news, or etc., it's the basic premise that a photograph doesn't lie. Like in that sense, you go back to a very basic evidentiary value. And something that, very unique thing that happened was that there were the crematorium photos, and then about 2 weeks later, these other photos came up of bodies floating in the Ganga and shallow graves by the Ganga River. The government of that state actually went and sent people to remove the shrouds from those shallow graves so that the evidence doesn't exist. But the photograph actually was faster than them. So people, so they saw the image circulating on social media. They sent people to remove it. And that to me is one of the most powerful testimonies to photography. It's like when systems of power are trying to erase evidence because of something that they saw in an image, I think that kind of defines it for you. So yeah, and we're not ones to, I don't think anyone takes joy in publishing these images, but it when you look back, this is a reminder of a government having abandoned its people. So
right.
Yeah.
There's a similarity, I think, in what Nina said and you right now about like not wanting to show any evidence of a failure, and every government with like right nationalist aspiration would try every method, every language, every discourse, to remove that, and would like appeal to our souls, our dignity, and so on. So this has like been used everywhere to kind of like cover up. There's one question, and it's a pretty long question. I would like to read it to you. It's about the protest. It's a question from Alrik. In my opinion, the coverage of protest and conflict photographically has much to do with the studium and punctum of images. The former works immensely with stitching a collective conscience, while the latter prints a singular image, emblematic to the event, in one's mind. Despite this, it is indispensable that photographers maintain the dignity of the time, subjects, and the event. If a photograph can be used as a tool for manipulation in the future, despite it capturing the truth at the same time it was taken, should it serve as a memory of time?
That's a really long question.
Yeah. So to kind of sum it up, I would this danger that something that's been let's say truthful in that particular moment, and I was reflecting a situation, could be obviously manipulated in the future or used in a different context. Within the archive of the public protests, obviously that we had all these questions, and I think in the Black Lives Matter movement, there was this issue of protecting the identity of people. Now with the masks on our faces, it's all a different issue. I read also about those very much like do-it-yourself kind of methods in Hong Kong, how the activists were giving advice, to the protesters, like how to not get recognized, how to not get captured. They were like fighting with the cameras on the streets, and they were trying to like basically not get recognized. And using it in a strange or a different context in the future. That's something that can always happen. But did you ever have did you have an experience like that? Like, something that was taken and was supposed to serve a certain cause, or just like basically, serve a message in a particular event, was later used in a very different context to do disgrace, or to like hurt the subjects?
Well, I mean, in 1998, I was in Afghanistan for Newsweek, reporting in Kabul and outside of Kabul on Taliban restrictions on women and girls. Okay, I could never have imagined September 11th and the United States then invading Afghanistan, right? And using, in part, as a justification for that invasion, the liberation, the need to liberate the women and girls of Afghanistan. And so pictures that I had taken in the late 90s, became part of this militaristic discourse of American imperial power. And this idea of we are going to bring democracy and liberate Afghan women and children, Afghan, women and girls. And I started to have an uneasy relationship with those photographs, right? Because it was never my intention to have them used to justify the occupation of another country. And so this can be very, I don't know how to safeguard photographs completely, right? I have put restrictions on many of my photographs about how they can be used. Sometimes I insist on seeing whatever text is going to be used around them, headline, caption, everything else. and have withdrawn permission to have pictures used. And I think that photographers who, feel very intensely about not being manipulated and trying to secure some narrative truth should think more about doing that, right? And not letting their pictures just to be published because someone wants them, right? And but it's a tricky subject. However, does that mean that you shouldn't take the picture, right? That you shouldn't make any photographs because somewhere down the line, someone can manipulate it or someone can use it, for some other purpose? That doesn't really leave us anywhere then,
Yeah, I think context is so important, right? Because in the ecosystem that we're in with social media, internet, once the image is out, it's out. If you're lucky enough, at least in America, there are even copyright infringement laws, etc. But here, there's not that much of a stringent. Like if somebody uses your image, there's no real recourse that you can seek. You can go to court, but it won't really help. And so you just basically work on the conscience of the people that you're publishing with. And I think that's what's really important. Like it's rare that actually photographers ask me, what's the story that you're publishing my image in? There are some that do. And I think others come to us with that trust because they largely know the kind of stories that we're doing. But it's like, ask me exactly the last word that I'm going to use to describe your caption, because your image is going to be used in line with the story. And so it's also going to be seen with somebody else's perspective. And so I think it's really important. Like there's a responsibility that photographers have to kind of oversee the circulation, but there will, I think, always be images that manage to kind of just go loose. But I don't think there's any, recourse to that. And you just kind of, I guess, you tackle that when it comes to you. Even with this Danish's image, a right-wing paper published it saying that they're, selling it to the West and glorifying the dead and like feasting on the dead is basically what was the headline with his paper. Did they take his permission? No. But, so at the end of the day, what can you, like some things you can't fight. So you pick your battles and, but yeah, context and circulation is very important.
Yes, in the archive of public protests, which is open and basically everybody can use those images, download them and use them in the article that kind of like serves the information about the women's strike. We also thought that this is a very risky situation, like we will just wait for somebody to violate that, occasion, but this hasn't happened yet. And I think, like you said, it's probably easier, to deal with something when it happens, when it comes, than just to like keep all these like images that we've been taking all these months, to ourselves, and to like distribute and control the flow. And that was the idea, to give it back to those who actually helped us, make them. We will have to go. Yes, thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you, Nina, and thank you, Tanvi. I'm very sorry Mohammed could not be with us today. This was part of the Riga Photo Month Festival, and it will be available to watch later also. So if you missed it today, thank you so much.
Thank you both.
Thanks so much. It was really great conversation with you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. Nice to meet you. Bye.
Bye.